Welcome, everyone, to the Policy Circle's virtual Move the Needle, Nowhere to Go But Up, the Future of America, Education in America, in partnership with EdChoice. My name is Savannah Lane, and I'm the Director of Education and Experiences here at the Policy Circle, a national nonpartisan nonprofit that informs, equips, and connects women to be more impactful citizens. We are made up of 11,000 highly engaged people like you in 45 states who are curious, thoughtful, and committed to uncovering solutions to make real change in your communities. This program is also brought to you in partnership by EdChoice, a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization committed to understanding and pursuing a K-12 education system that empowers every family to choose the schooling environment that fits their children's needs best. We're grateful for their support. Now, before we dive in, earlier this year, we released the Policy Circle's latest education-focused brief on innovation and education with EdChoice, co-authored by McShane, who is here on this panel today. And I encourage you to read the brief and host a conversation this summer in your home, your office, club, or community center. This is a topic we all need to be paying more attention to. Now, as the summer end nears and many head back to school and many are already starting school, education is on the minds of many families. And with staggeringly low scores that have been released in the past few years, we need innovative practices now more than ever to ensure that we improve education for our students here in the U.S. Today, we're joined by two great speakers who will have a chance to dive deeper at the end of this conversation with you all through an audience Q&A. And in the meantime, I want to waste no time. I want to bring our first speaker here today and introduce our first panelist, Lori Armistead. Lori is a senior program officer for the education program at the Walton Family Foundation. Along with managing foundation grant making in Georgia, Lori leads a portfolio of national policy and advocacy grantees. Before joining the foundation, she served as director of state projects at the National Nonprofits Alliance for School Choice and Advocates for School Choice. Previously, she was the Director of Public Affairs and the Director of Education Task Force at the American Legislative Exchange Council. Lori began her career serving as the legislative advisor to Ohio's then Assistant Majority Leader. Lori, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a critical conversation that we are having here, and I want to dive right in with you. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, essentially known as the nation's report card, released earlier this year that math and reading scores in the United States have hit some of the lowest levels in decades. Why are we seeing such a steep decline, and what are some of the innovative practices and policies that we can implement to help change the course of this decline for our students?
Well, first, Savannah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really encouraged by just starting this conversation. So thanks for the forum and for the conversation today. Obviously, undoubtedly, the pandemic has put a spotlight on K-12 education that is changing the conversation in a way that I think is really important to back up and just understand what the system and students are experiencing. I mentioned the pandemic, but the pandemic is not the only aspect of student learning loss. We've erased 2 decades of progress in math and literacy. Math levels in this country are the lowest that they've been since 1990, which is when I was in middle school. And literacy proficiency is not much better. So while it's true that the pandemic certainly had some horrible impact on student learning, honestly, student proficiency levels from NAEP were sinking even before the pandemic started. So it's really important not to just blame learning loss on the pandemic itself, but also recognize that the loss was starting a couple of years before. I think that has to do with the different practices of how we are tracking transparent available information for student proficiency and many other reasons. And while these outcomes are really chilling, I'm actually pretty optimistic. I've been in this work for more than 20 years, and I know I've never seen or witnessed so much energy around education before. We have partners across the country who are coming together to find new ways to solve problems, and they're proposing bold solutions, both in the classroom, in their own homes, and in state legislatures across the country. So it's really everyone's coming at these problems with optimism and new solutions. So that's really exciting to me. I'll also just add that our efforts at the Walton Family Foundation are to respond to this pivotal moment by including creative coalitions through philanthropic, nonprofit organizations and the private sector to advocate for research and development infrastructure and education to make sure that we better understand what interventions and approaches work with which students, because we know different things work for different students and children. And as we've entered this very new reality of historic learning loss, we are also at the Walton Family Foundation, we are also pushing ourselves to evolve the policy priorities that we support. We've obviously long been known for our support for educational choice and academic transparency, but we're also beginning to broaden our work to include high quality instructional materials, especially around literacy. We know that literacy reform that focuses on phonics and early stage interventions, coupled with funding for educators to be coached appropriately, can dramatically increase reading comprehension. We've seen that in Mississippi, which is a really great shining example of how that type of policy can positively impact young literacy scores. And I'll just kind of close on this question to think about students. Walton Family Foundation has actually been spending a good amount of time and driving the question of what do students want and how are they experiencing their own education. And recently we did a study that shows that more than half of students give their school a C or lower in making them excited about learning. And they worry that they're not prepared to build successful lives. These are things that we can change and that we're seeing models that are actively trying to change that trajectory for students. So I think it's really important to learn from them directly.
Well, it's great to hear your optimism when we think of these staggeringly low test scores. To hear your positive outlook, I think, is a very refreshing focus. And you touched on a little bit of the Walton Family Foundation's focus, but I want to hear a little bit more about your efforts to increase this high quality education access to families in need and addressing these educational inequities. And you all mentioned your doers, your thinkers, and your learners. So what have you learned alongside those groups within a successful education system, and how can we take these lessons into other school systems in a larger, bigger picture?
That's a great question. It's one that we grapple with every single day. In fact, I've been on 2 calls already this morning of like, okay, we've learned that. Now, how are we going to shift and who are we going to share that information with to make sure that our partners are best supported to make great decisions out in the field on behalf of students every day. So, I'll give just a couple of high level reflections here. One is, we know that current education systems are not working for everyone. So we're exploring how students' interests, passions, and education align with the opportunities that will be available to them in the future. I saw a study recently that, the students of today, only half of their jobs exist today. So how are we ensuring that we're connecting students with the right learning environments and the right just innate capabilities and confidence moving into an unknown economic future, frankly. So we're looking for ideas everywhere, from young people, parents, communities, educators, to make sure that we're driving solutions that are beginning to close those gaps. And one major shift that we've made in the last few years is to really shift our definition of choice. In the past, we've thought about choice as being a whole school change, and we certainly still believe in whole school change. We believe that all parents, especially families that don't have the economic resources, have the ability to switch whole school environments if that's what's best for their students. At the same time, we also know that a lot of other educational options that are not as whole scale, but maybe a little more atomized, can be life-changing for students as well. So for instance, if you think about dual enrollment programs, apprenticeship programs, abilities for students to access credentialing that is connected with careers that are available in their states, career-connected learning experiences and pathways are also other ways that we're thinking about dramatically expanding options for students. And the way I think about it is really thinking about changing the idea of the unit of change being the school to the student. So if the student needs is really excelling at going to their traditional school, maybe, but also accessing some of these other programs that are both inside and outside of the government system, maybe, you know, that's I truly believe that's that is the future of education. We've been supporting some of this type of work through grant programs that help connect navigation systems for parents, especially parents who may not otherwise know about their community's opportunities. We're helping education partners like the Vela Fund help educational entrepreneurs launch innovative out-of-system programs, and just many other ways. But we're very committed to making sure that we're fostering ecosystems that have students at the center, but also recognize that employers, schools, and communities are a part of the eventual success for students.
Well, this is really encouraging to hear, because when we think of the student focus, that inevitably loops in, as you mentioned, a larger community, whether it's through apprenticeships or focusing on the role of connecting with parents as well. It's a full picture focus, but that student focus center is a really important element. I want to ask you one more question before we bring in our next panelist, and then close it off with audience questions, which I already see a few in the chat. So audience members, thank you for sharing those. We will get to those in our conversation. So please feel free to continue to populate the chat with your questions for both Lori and Mike. But Lori, in today's fast-paced world, we see that students are learning and working in different ways, methods, and places. You mentioned students today may not even have the jobs to visualize yet because of the developing technology that's coming. So how can technology enhance learning opportunities and continue to modernize the classroom and really keep up with the 21st century?
Yeah, we hear a lot about technology as a tool, right? And we also have a lot of fear around technology. You don't want I have 3 little children who are, between the 4th grade and pre-K, and I don't want them on devices all day. And at the same time, teaching them how to use technology as a tool to learning and to curiosity is also a real opportunity that is unprecedented, frankly. I used to sit in my public library and open up a bunch of encyclopedias and get inspired. And that required a lot of work on my part. And I feel like, my kids have this kind of information and far more than I could have ever imagined at their fingertips. Walton Family Foundation recently actually partnered with Impact Research on a pretty interesting survey about ChatGPT, which frankly, I know very little about. And the more I'm learning about it, we're learning about how AI systems like this can actually help enhance teaching and learning, both for simplifying the work of the teacher, of actually being able to use some of these tools in class planning and student preparation, of like thinking about what interests a specific child. Maybe it's sports. How do I teach this child a concept through the eyes of sports? We can actually begin to do that in a very individualized way that I think is like the tip of the future, and it's very exciting. And we found in this study that we did that an overwhelming majority of teachers who have used the tool have been responding very positively, as their students have as well. But beyond technology, there are other innovative policies that can really drive toward modernization of the classroom. Like I said before, credentialing, apprenticeship, tutoring, gifted programs, all the way to like the broad scale universal ESA programs. Essentially, all of these things actually require to access all of these things in a way that's equitable and that's funded for all families, not just families that have the means. You really need to just change one core policy, and it's not that easy, but it's really flipping how we fund education and making sure that it's student-based, that it's portable, that it's atomized, and that it's weighted for the needs of individual students. And we know that we can't wait. I mean, This is the time for us to start listening to students, to educators, and to the practices that seem to really be working.
Absolutely. And we will come back to, I see a lot of audience questions talking about certifications, ESAs, and more. So we will come back to that. I want to bring our next panelist over here, Mike McShane. I want to introduce Mike, and then Lori, we will bring you back for our audience Q&A. But Dr. Michael McShane is our Director of National Research at EdChoice, and also he co-authored the Policy Circles Education Innovation Brief, as mentioned. He's the author, editor, co-author, and co-editor of 11 books on education policy, including his most recent Hybrid Homeschooling, A Guide to the Future of Education. He is currently an opinion contributor to Forbes, and his analyses and commentary have been published widely in the media, including in USA Today, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. He's been featured in education-specific outlets such as Teachers College Record, Education Week, and Education Next. In addition to authoring numerous white papers, McShane has had academic work published in Education Finance and Policy, the Handbook of Education Politics and Policy, and the Journal of School Choice. A former high school teacher, he earned his PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas and is actually currently in Ireland. He did his Master of Education from the University of Notre Dame, so we've got that Irish touch, and then his BA in English from St. Louis University, all the way from Ireland. Mike McShane, thank you for joining us. It's a little bit later across the pond, but we're thrilled to have you here, and we want to dive right in. So we worked on this education innovation brief with you, and we have discussed the transformative technologies at length. They're impacting the world. Lori brought them up with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. What do these elements have in terms of impact on education? And what, if any, are the things that we need to be wary of when understanding these newly emerging technologies' potential impact?
For sure. It's great to be here with all of you, and it was so much fun collaborating on that policy brief. It was wonderful working with all of you. You know, when it comes to technology, I'm a big subscriber to Amara's Law, and Amara's Law is named after this guy Roy Amara. I think he was at Harvard and he was at Stanford. He was a technologist, sort of at the turn of the century, which is weird to say when I say turn of the century, like the 2000s, but I guess it was long enough ago. I guess I'm old enough that I have to come to grips with that fact. But so his Amara's Law was always that the impact of technologies are overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term. And I think a lot of that is happening around things like ChatGPT and others. You have these sort of two camps developing where you have these sort of techno utopians that are like, any day now, AI will solve all of our problems and we won't have to think anymore and it'll just do everything for us and we can live lives of leisure and whatever. And then you have the like techno, I don't know, whatever the opposite of a utopian, dystopian that's like AI is going to kill all of us in 20 minutes. So obviously, as you might imagine, setting up those two wonderful polarities, you know, I'm somewhere in the middle on them. I think, like Lori brought up, I think there's tremendous opportunity for AI tools and others to do what technology does best, which is make our lives easier. I'm a former high school teacher. There are so many rote tasks that teachers and administrators and other school staff have to do that hopefully smart AI could help solve, just the same way in the past things like spreadsheet technology made, you know, keeping school records easier and email made communications easier. So I think those things exist. Now, also, as a former I was a high school English teacher, I do recognize that there are some things like the take-home essay, and the take-home essay's days may be numbered. You know, I think that's going to be something that AI, that frankly kids can just put into an AI engine like ChatGPT and get a passable high school essay, maybe even like up to like a college level essay. Now, what exactly we do about that? We do more stuff in person. We require more maybe presentations or things like that. I actually was listening to an interesting podcast with Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn. And he's kind of an AI evangelist type person. Someone asked him this question, like, is homework going away? What are students going to do? And he had some interesting ideas on it. One of them was like, you know, maybe in the future you don't assign an essay, but rather what you do is you have ChatGPT or one of these other engines generate the essay, and then you give it to the students and say like, hey, this essay is a C. You need to make it into an A. And you can use AI tools or you can use whatever, but like the product at the end needs to be better than this. And so you're improving upon what it does, keeping the human element in there, the human thinking that's into it. So that sort of something in my brain that I was like, okay, I think that's interesting and potentially useful. But I think also some of these technologies are going to cause us to ask questions about schools, about how schools are organized. Obviously, what we've seen over Zoom and platforms like the one that we're talking now, we can extend the reach of interesting people. I wish there was someone interesting talking right now. It's just extending my reach, which I can only apologize for. But it really offers the opportunity for, think about foreign languages, or think about I think of lots of rural communities that might not be able to get higher level math and science teachers or others. Like, there are lots of opportunities to use technology. And again, like, sparingly. This isn't Zoom school where someone would be in there every day. But hey, look, I'm in a high school where we've tapped out at Algebra 2 because we've really struggled to get a calculus teacher in Marceline, Missouri. Fair enough. Maybe you can join a class at the University of Missouri, or some other school is making that stuff available online. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I'm wary of anyone who says everything is different, everything has to change, nothing will be the same. I tend to think it will be more an evolutionary process. But I'm generally hopeful with some skepticisms.
Well, I always appreciate the optimism and the wariness. I think a touch is okay as well. I mean, we have to recognize that things are changing, but maybe it's the take-home essays and not necessarily, reworking the entire homework identity and structure. Really interesting to also think about the opportunities for rural communities and exposing that. So thank you, Mike, for your reflections there. And I want to turn to some of the work that you've most recently done with EdChoice, the latest Schooling in America survey. And in the Schooling in America survey, you all shared that about 1 in 4 Americans believe K through 12 education is heading in the right direction, which is a 15-point decline since 2021. Private and charter school parents are more likely to think that K through 12 education in America is heading in the right direction than the wrong one. So talk to us about this survey. What does the future of innovative school options and choice look like? And share some other takeaways from this survey that you all have recently done.
Absolutely. And I need to shout out my colleagues at EdChoice who really took the lead. I'm going to take all of the credit as I talk about this, but my colleagues, Paul DePerna, Colin Ritter, John Kristoff, who really did the yeoman's work on this. So the Schooling in America survey is a survey that we've done this is the 11th year of it. So every year we poll a nationally representative sample of Americans. We oversample, to use a kind of term of art from polling, parents to get a nationally representative sample of them as well. It's sort of one half of our polling operation. We also, and we can talk about if it's interesting in other places, we do a monthly nationally representative poll partnered with Morning Consult called our opinion tracker. But at least these results are our annual poll. And while our monthly poll allows us to kind of know what's in the zeitgeist at any given moment, our annual poll lets us look at some of these trends over time. So some of the numbers that you just brought up, we're able to see where were they 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera. And so you're right. One of the things that we saw this year were dips in the number of respondents who thought that education was going on. We ask a classic polling right track, wrong track question. So yeah, the general public, only 27% of respondents thought that the education system was going on the right track, while 70% thought it was on the wrong track. Amongst parents are more optimistic, but it's still sort of underwater in that only 43% of parents think that schools are going on the right track, while 56% are on the wrong track. And so when it comes to things like alternatives to the system, we've been asking questions around things like what Lori brought up, education savings accounts, charter schools, and others. All of these are generally popular with parents. So overall, just a question of like, do you support school choice or school choice writ large? 67% of parents said that they supported it. When we talked about charter schools, 65% of parents support them. Tax credit scholarships, which is a form of private school choice, 66%. School vouchers, 67%. And the education savings accounts that Lori was talking about, 75% of American parents said that they supported them, which is obviously a very, very strong number. The one number that I do want to highlight, though, and I know there have definitely been some questions in the chat around measuring success and thinking about these new programs as they exist. Education savings accounts, others sort of alternative models. How do we think about what they're doing? One of the things that I think is super important is the reasons why people choose the problems that they want solved by schools. And obviously, as we've talked about today, academics are super important and a core function of what schools are doing. But one of the things that our poll this year really brought home was the role that safety plays. And we knew this a little bit from our monthly polling. Unfortunately, with the tragedies in Uvalde, and others, we started putting in polling questions around school safety. I can give you some numbers here. We ask a question of what percentage of American school parents are concerned that an armed intruder, will come into their child's school. If you put together those who said that they are extremely worried, very worried, or somewhat worried, 77% of parents said that they were one of those three. If we knock out the somewhat worried and just take the people who are very worried or extremely worried, that's 51% of parents responded in that way. Across other polling that we've done, big concerns around bullying that we're seeing in lots of parental surveys and some of the surveys we've done of teens and others, a really serious issue that's taking place there. Students describing their schools as more chaotic as opposed to orderly. So it's not just the sort of most sort of extreme versions of school violence and others, but also the sort of more mundane and difficult ones are in there as well. And so when we ask families, what are your reasons for choosing the school that you chose? Amongst homeschooling parents, number one answer, safe environment, like by a country mile. Same for charter school parents. Number one answer is safe environment. For private school parents, that was number 3. And for traditional public schooling families, that was number 4. So school safety, I think, is really at the forefront for lots of people's school choices. They want to choose a safe environment for their child because they have real serious concerns with bullying. They have concerns about violence. And so part of it is when we think about it we think about school choice only through an academic lens. Try and think of like schools' choice's job is to, raise student test score. We take their test scores when they come in and when they go out and whatever. You realize that like, while that's important, that's not always that's not always the reason that people are choosing these schools. And again, if you're worried that your child is unsafe, I understand why like their test scores are a secondary concern, right? So I think that that's something that we really need to think about. And those of us that are involved in this space need to really think about the reasons why people are choosing, the problems that choice is trying to solve for them. And I think that we need to take that into account when we're evaluating these programs and measuring their success.
Well, Mike, that's really helpful to unpack this important understanding of the School in America survey, and really excited for our audience members to dig deeper. The link is in the chat. When we think about the decreasing statistics and the test scores, that's one part of the equation. And you've brought up some very important elements of this bigger picture that we are looking at. And so digging a little bit deeper, we want to hear from you what advice you have for parents and grandparents who are not only concerned about the quality of education, but what are the questions that they should be asking in terms of that bigger picture, and where do they turn for support in their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you have organizations like mine at EdChoice where we try to work to help develop and support parent advocates to work in their own communities, to advocate for their children and to network with one another. There are these great organizations out there that are providing things like startup grants. So Lori was talking about the Vela Fund, which I know Walton has played a really key role in. It's such a fascinating, wonderful organization, both the direct funding that they're doing, but also the networking that they are putting together. One of the things that I've seen, so we mentioned at the beginning, the book that I did on hybrid homeschooling, which, by the way, everyone listening, is available at your local neighborhood online book retailer. Hybrid Homeschooling, Guide to the Future of Education. Always be closing. That's what I'm always working on that. But anyway, one of the things, thank you. One of the things that I learned throughout that process was the degree to which people use like social media. Mm-hmm. Folks who are looking to found schools or find different schools for their children looked at your local, Kansas City. I'm originally from Kansas City homeschooling group. Kansas City Microschooling Group, and others. Now, some of these microschool platforms and others like Prenda, like Primer, like Kai Pods, like Wildflower Schools, they do some work of actually putting people together. So if you're looking for that particular school model, if you're looking for a micro school, if you're looking for a hybrid homeschool, trying to find those in your local area would be a good way to do that. But to me, look, on a sort of bigger picture, like the questions that folks should be asking. The big thing for me is it's sort of, what do you want? What do you want out of schools? And are schools providing that? Because I recognize we live in, well, I don't live there anymore, but I am from the United States of America, a big, wonderful, diverse, pluralistic country where lots of different people have different ideas about what they want from schools. And there are obviously certain commonalities that we want to see across different school models. But what is emphasized and how it's emphasized is going to vary from state to state, from community to community. And so I think starting with the end in mind, right? Starting with like, well, what do we want out of schools? What do we want to see from them? And then sort of backing up, are schools providing that? If they aren't providing that, why? Are there resource constraints? Are there political constraints? Are there, some of the stuff Lori was talking about, pedagogical constraints? Are there, whatever? And then thinking, well, is this, we want to work within the existing institution that exists there, or we want to look for something else?
Well, and I really appreciate your plug for your book, and that you're plugging that, and I'm going to plug the brief we worked on, because we touched on a lot of these really great resources that you've highlighted. And I think the bigger theme here, Lori touched on this with the student focus, you've touched on this with this wider picture, is taking it not just from one statistic, one test score, one community, but that bigger picture theme and focus. And so I want to bring Lori back here because we have so many great audience questions. I don't even know if we're going to have time to cover them all, but we're going to do our best. First, Lori, Mike, thank you for sharing your resources, your background, your focus in this. I'm going to just kick it off to our audience questions, and maybe Lori, I'll push this one to you first, and Mike, you can chime in here. But we have an audience question asking how parents and communities can be more actively engaged in supporting and improving these local solutions. And Mike, I think you just shared a good couple of resource points, but Lori, any thoughts on how we can encourage our audience members, parents, grandparents, and communities here?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is to just show up, right? Go to your kid's school, even if you don't have a child in school at this time. Go and volunteer. Ask a teacher what he or she might need to better serve their students. Go to a school board meeting. I mean, go and see schools that might not be a traditional school. When you can go online, and I'm sure Mike could connect you with some of these resources, but you can go online and find like a micro school that like is 3 blocks down from you that you had no idea existed. Go and talk to that leader and ask, like, what made you take that leap? Those kinds of, the more questions you ask and the more you show up, I think the more credibility you have, and the more you see that, like, it's, there is not one solution in this space. Your contribution might be volunteering, and it might be becoming a board member at a charter school or running for office. I mean, there may be, a lot of different ways that you can offer talent. But the one way that you won't is if you're sitting on the sidelines. So get very involved is my advice.
Thank you, Laura. It's really helpful. And again, we have resources and links that you can visit in our education innovation brief. We'll link it in the chat. But Mike, we have an interesting question here that follows up on a little bit of the themes that you touched on earlier. With stress and anxiety being some of the #1 reasons that parents are switching schools, how will more choice and parental empowerment help with that?
I would answer by saying, remember the kid in the banana costume. And where I'll go with this is today in the Washington Post, there was a long feature story on micro schools, hybrid homeschools. And in it, there is this incredibly powerful, both picture and story of a young man, I think he's 12 years old, on the autism spectrum, who was really suffering in his traditional public school. He was bullied. He didn't make friends. And he moved into this microschooling environment where he's able to make friends. He's really thriving. But one of the things that stands out is that some days he likes to wear a banana costume to school. And look, for lots of perfectly reasonable reasons, your traditional public or private school would not be able to accommodate a young man in a banana suit, right? But in these smaller, dense communities where everyone knows one another, and I think his name was Caleb, if memory serves me correct, and they say like, oh, like that's Caleb, and some days he wears a banana suit. Cool, no big deal. It makes it work. I think about those incredible opportunities that are available. During my research for the hybrid homeschooling book, I cannot tell you the number of parents that I spoke to that looked to hybrid homeschooling to help their children with anxiety, children with sensory processing disorders, and others that became easily overwhelmed by school, because the sort of episodic nature of school. Let's say the formal classroom, they were in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll never forget talking to this mother in the foyer of this school, sort of interviewing her. And she said, look, if my son has a bad day at school, I can say, you don't have to go back tomorrow, right? He can go home, he does his homework, work day, resets himself, recenters, and then is back in school on Wednesday. I think back to my teaching days of how many kids had a terrible Monday that led into an awful Tuesday that got them suspended on Wednesday. And if something could have been done to break that cycle and give them that chance to reset, all of that lost learning time, all of those. So paradoxically, even though these children spend less time in school, they're actually spending probably more time in school, more time on task because of their ability to do this. So the flexibility that school choice offers to create these types of environments that can nurture children and children of all different kinds of needs, that can build these communities that are supporting and nurturing of them. I just think it opens up these tremendous opportunities to serve so many kids that are ill-suited by larger, sort of more standardized educational environments.
Well, I certainly think that we will remember the student in the banana costume. And I think we have all of our own stories like this, whether it's your children, your friends, your community members. And so seeing the opportunity of choice, as you mentioned, Mike, the flexibility, so important. Really quickly, I want to give another plug for the policy circle, because Lori, you touched on a really important element of just getting involved. And sometimes it's easier said than done. Our civic leadership engagement roadmap is a clear course specifically focused on education. We will put a link in the chat for that clear education focus if you are looking to get more involved, if you're looking to build on what Mike and Lori are sharing about getting involved in your community, understanding the choice and flexibility that we can provide and improve our education opportunities for students. Start there. I think it's a great resource. I want to plug in, though, as many audience questions as we can here before our time is up. And so, Lori, we had touched a little bit on ESAs. Can you help us understand and unpack what that is and what that opportunity is for our community, for education, and for our audience members to understand?
Oh, I'd be happy to. So ESAs are education savings accounts, and there's almost 20 states in the country have some form of them now. I'd say 7 or 8 states have what will be either are or will be universally available ESAs for all students in their state. And what they are is it's a funding source from the state that allows parents to take their child out of system, so out of a government-run school, and make decisions for their education. The money can and it sometimes has to be used at a private school, but it can also be used for other educational experiences or needs, curriculum, tutoring, gifted services, occupational therapy, kind of anything that a student needs. So it's very flexible use of funds instead of our traditional voucher programs that just has money following a student to a private school. So it's much more flexible. And we're really excited about the opportunity that ESAs provide, because you can imagine, especially the more students that are eligible for an ESA, the more likely that innovative practices will start to pop up, so that we can serve students much more flexibly. We're also, though, very interested in how we track the progress of these students, because, potentially, let's say 10% of students in a state are participating in a program like this. That's a lot of students, depending on where you are. And we want to make sure that those students, that we're learning from best practices in those programs, and also to make sure that we understand how students are doing. And to me, that probably means some kind of transparent norm reference test for students that is not dictated of which one to take or how often to take it, but that it's done on an annual basis, and that there's some kind of comparative analysis that we can do. I'm really optimistic that we're going to see some very positive effects of these programs as we go into the future.
Certainly. And I want to touch on an audience member question and comment too. Mike, they share that this is exactly where our son moved on. He's on the spectrum, and he moved to a school specifically designed for these kids. And now he's a sophomore in college. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's a great story. I'm feeling optimistic speaking to both of you, but even with our audience members, this is exactly, what we're discussing here. I want to ask one more question to both of you before we ask your final call to action for our audience members. And really, this is something we touched on earlier with apprenticeships, with these certifications. Where is the progress in that? And are we seeing these career training opportunities expand? And what are some of the best practices or examples that you can think of? And Mike, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so I definitely see states sort of a version of what I talked about earlier. Some states are calling them course access programs. What they do is create a little bit of flexibility during the day. So these are students who attend traditional public schools, but if they're looking for coursework that isn't offered in their school, they can take, let's say they have 7 periods a day, they can take 1/7 of the funding or 2/7 of the funding to go to outside courses. So some of these are on a sort of academic track of, as I mentioned, like we top out at Algebra 2, so we want to take calculus or we want to take whatever. But there's so much workforce development stuff in this as well. It's so expensive for schools to have, teaching kids to weld or shop classes or any of that stuff that maybe were in schools at one point, but are very difficult. But there could be like a local union hall down by, or an apprentice training center, or any of those things. And by just making a little bit more flexibility in funding and partnering between those two groups, you can get kids to cross those barriers. So I know Louisiana's been doing really interesting work in that area. I think Texas does some interesting work in that area. My home state of Missouri has done some interesting work in that area as well. So I think that's creating that little bit of flexibility and creating those partnerships is really the way to go.
Great. Yeah, and I threw in the chat, Savannah, a resource from the Foundation for Excellence in Education. They have a very robust programming around these questions. It's called in a project called Pathways Matter. So I'd really encourage your viewers to check that out. It's a great resource, and it's very robust. I would also just add that it's really important to make sure that these programs align with the actual needs of the community. If you're creating pathways programs that are not aligned to the jobs that are open in your state or in your region, then it's probably, it might be a great opportunity to learn a skill, but it's probably not going to lead to an economically sufficient life. So making sure that I live in Georgia, and we have 40,000 CDL jobs that are open today, and those are good paying jobs. Like, how do we make sure that people are well trained to get a good job and as they enter the workforce? So making sure that we have an alignment between workforce and education.
Great. And, we are close to our time, but you both have shared such important elements, from the student focus, taking a pulse and checkpoint of a community before you're pushing a specific training or certification. These are really, really helpful. If you could both share just one final call to action for our community members, our parents, our viewers, people who are tuning in, what would that be? Mike, I'll start with you.
Oh, man. That's a great one. I mean, like, the narrow one is like, check out our website at edchoice.org, and we have lots of great resources. Subscribe to our podcast. That's great. But I think, like, as much as possible, Lori said something that I think is great. Like volunteering. I think so many of these really great new schools that are starting are being done on kind of a wing and a prayer. And so if you have any sort of, all the skills that the people on this call have are needed, right? Like it may not be in education, but I know people here with business backgrounds or government lawyers. There's so many questions around this stuff. So finding folks that are doing this in your neighborhood, or if they're in your church, or if they're affiliated with, I don't know, alumni networks at your college, whatever it is, working with those folks, volunteering, I think could do so much to help so many people.
Lori.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Mike. I think it's twofold. One, be sober about the problems. We have real problems. It's not all exciting. There's a lot of exciting work, but it is the problems and the mental health, academic achievement slipping decades back. That is irreversible in the immediate term. So really understanding that this isn't just like a new experience for my student, but like actually being an advocate for children constantly, and looking at the students as the absolute laser focus, not about a system, not about the adults in the building, but about like, how is this going to help a student learn and make up for major loss? And then be optimistic, and then go and find the really great things in your community, because they're there, I promise you. And then go and roll up your sleeves and get into this, get into the action, because it's very edifying.
Well, thank you, Mike McShane, Lori Armistead. We are so grateful to have had the time with both of you. Thank you for joining us today. And to our audience members, we have a few more links and opportunities to remind you all. Of course, as Mike mentioned, you can check out our resources from our friends at EdChoice. Links can be found in the chat, whether it's the Survey in America, of course, the Walton Family Foundation with Lori, and some of the links that you have shared with us. Read our latest education innovation brief. The link is in the chat, and I encourage you all to read this to learn more about what Lori and Mike have shared about the statistics, and then take a turn of optimism and hopefully host a conversation about what can be done to address these issues. You can explore our Civic Leadership Engagement Roadmap course, which is solely focused on education. It provides the roadmap for you. The link can be in the chat, and we have an upcoming cohort that is due very soon, but please reach out to us if you are interested in the CLEAR education program. And if you don't already subscribe to the Policy Circles resources, please click the link in the chat to sign up, to stay up to date with our latest events, our briefs, our upcoming programs, and more. And finally, if you're not a supporting member, please consider joining. Your $10 a month or $100 donation helps the Policy Circle build fact-based briefs, host constructive conversations just like these today around the country, and deliver a remarkably effective and flexible CLEAR program. So please click the link and join us today. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.